Explorers, thanks for checking out a fresh episode of the Restoration Today podcast. Today, I'm very excited to bring in someone from outside the industry who I have gotten to know actually through my MBA journey so far at Michigan State. It's David Wheatley. He is a principal and founder at Humanergy. I got to do some kind of leadership development stuff with my MBA group during the orientation process, which was very eye-opening and a pretty intensive process in getting to know our team and making sure that dynamics were well set, because, at this point in the program, as David knows behind the scenes, there's some dynamics that start to come into play at a certain point in all of this. So anyway, I'm excited to have David here to talk about leadership development and teams, especially, and how to grow and make healthy teams, especially as, in our industry, we're going through a lot of change with M&A and consolidation and all of those things. So we have a lot of stuff to talk through, but David, I am going to toss it over to you to introduce yourself and share a little bit about Humanergy.
Well, thank you, Michelle. And I thought I was on here because you felt I needed some restoration work. But we'll take that now. So Humanergy is a small, we call it a boutique leadership development company. We're based kind of around Michigan, although we haven't had an office since the fall of 2019. Which
that was
makes
a smart
us look,
time to get out.
Yeah, it did. We got out of our office and got into Zoom, and lo and behold, it was very timely. So, our team is based across the Midwest, but we serve clients, probably 60-70% of them in Michigan. But then we've also served clients all over the world in terms of leadership development, which is mostly coaching and some training. And then when we're doing coaching and training in an organization, we can do some tough facilitations. I just got off the phone with somebody who's looking for some help with the leadership team that I've worked with, most of them, but point them in the right direction.
Perfect. Okay. So one of my big takeaways, which I actually wrote about in one of my publisher's notes a few months ago in the magazine, was the non-negotiable fact that we came up with when we were putting together our team charter and things. I've heard of people having their kind of priorities, but having a non-negotiable ends up resonating a lot different than just setting your priorities, right? So how do you kind of coach teams through setting these non-negotiables in a way that they're appropriate and can be respected by the whole team without being like offensive or you're taking advantage or whatever that may be?
Well, just frame the non-negotiables. We wrote a book a couple of years ago called What Great Teams Do Great, based on our experience working with teams over the last 24 years. And we found that the team charter, if you like, what we call the setup, there's 4 questions that you really have to address in that setup to get the team right. And many teams just skip straight over the setup and get into the plan. And then they have to come back and do the setup at some point later on. And it's a lot more time expensive to do it kind of backwards. And so there's 4 questions are, who are we? So who are the people on this team, and why are we the ones on this team? What's our external reality? So what's the forces that are putting this team together, if you like? What are we trying to achieve and why? Which is, that the piece that quite often people can do, and they do that focus. But this 4th one that you get to is a little bit unique for us, which is what are our non-negotiable behavioral expectations of each other? And what we're addressing is many organizations have a set of values that they put up on the wall on a nice plaque, and it looks very pretty, and it consists of things like integrity and courage or transparency or whatever they are. And it really means nothing. So after a while, it means nothing. It maybe meant something to the people who are having the conversation. And so what we do with teams is get them to say, let's list, and it's usually between 4 and 10 of the absolute lines that I would expect you not to cross. And so it's the behavioral lines, because then we're establishing this team's behavioral kind of minimum expectations, which can then set us up to do the planning and the work, and actually free us up to do some things independently because we know what's expected. So quite often it can be things like, we have the freedom to make mistakes, just be willing to own up to them and learn from them.
Yeah.
That's great. And if we set that up front, it makes it a lot easier for people to do that, because that's an expectation. Say what you'll do and do what you'll say. Do what you say. It's another one that I hear commonly. that's in there that's just a matter of, hey, that's what we expect. So that then if that doesn't happen, we can come back to that and say, help me understand where we went wrong. And that gives
Yes.
people a chance to either do a mea culpa, admit, hey, I screwed up, I messed up there, or to realign around what it was, or potentially realign the person out of the team because it doesn't fit. So one of my favorites is no surprises.
Oh,
And when you dig into that, what you really mean is, hey, if you know the wheel's coming off, share it.
yeah.
We might not be able to do anything about it, but we can at least prepare for that. And so, if you surprise me with something that you've known for a while, we will have a problem. And that's the idea of these lines in the sand, if you like, is this 4 to 10 behavioral expectations that people don't tend to spend the time thinking about.
So when you talk about these charters and these teams, when you talk about teams, are you talking about like departments within a company that create these charters, or is it more like a team that's working on a project together? What does that look like?
Yes.
Okay. Just checking.
um, well, we've done this with our whole organizations where
Okay.
they've said we as an organization need to do this up front. And I work with an organization that actually took the non-negotiables and they use the language commitments,
Mm,
and they've got 6 that they've put out through all 420 of their employees.
wow.
And but that came from their leadership team having that conversation about what's our minimum behavioral expectations of each other. And it can also go down to a team. So I did work in an industrial laundry in Michigan, and they did it as an organization. But then every team has their own set of non-negotiable green path expectations, as we call them in the book, and they have them hanging on the wall in their department. And so the people who put the shirts on the hangers for them to go on the rack to go through the drying machine, they sat down and they said, these are the expectations we have of each other. And that was that team's non-negotiables.
Is there any sort of rule as to how often you should be reviewing these non-negotiables or reviewing the charter if you make one?
Well, one thing is if ever a person joins or leaves a team, then
Mm,
the team's changed. And
yeah.
so you have to come back and look at those things because, the team has changed.
Mm,
And I think the timing of it, as you get into what great teams do great, we talk about creating a good intervals of checking to make sure we're doing what we say we're going to do. And that can be
yes.
different for an organization to a departmental team. But having that cadence built in where you stop and you say, are we doing what we said we were going to do? And if we are, is it working? And if we're not, why not? Because that's another question that people tend to avoid. They come up with these great plans, put forth the plan, then the next quarter the numbers aren't hitting and they come up with another plan. And and this more sensible question will be is, are we doing what we said we were going to do in the plan? And it's
Hmm.
usually no. And so it's a matter of, well, why not? We spent all that time. Now let's look at what we need to do to make that plan work, because
Yep.
when we waste time to go back over the plan again.
Yes. Okay, I see that your company has a solidarity statement. That's something that I've never seen before, and I'm curious what that means.
Well, it's our way of really and this came about in 2020 post George Floyd, when people were making statements about their
Mhm,
organization, that they wanted to make a statement of where they stood, and we sat down, and this is our version of what we came up with, which is, what we're about, which is making a difference in the lives of the people in the communities in which we and they work.
mhm,
And that, I believe, has a broader faction, a broader element to it, which means that equity is important too.
mhm,
And we're actually in the process as an organization of going through a course with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation on expanding equity to look at internally at what our plan needs to be to make sure we're living up to
mhm.
our expectations in this statement. But it was just our way of saying, hey, this is who we are and what we believe in. And a lot of that is around supporting people wherever they are, in whichever corner of the world they're in, to create an equitable existence as much as possible.
Okay. All right. Okay, continuing on talking about teams. There are three terms that I saw you talking about a little bit as well, like on the website and in some podcasts and blogs. There's a lot of information on the Humanergy website for anybody who is listening to this. So lots of
Yes, there
information you can
is.
find there. Yes.
Yeah.
So every team has accountability, authority, and responsibility within it. And I think there can be some confusion between those terms. So kind of help unravel the confusion there.
You made me work on this because it was like a matter of, okay, I have to think about that question, and and I my thinking goes to responsibility is about the completion of tasks. So what am I
Mhm.
responsible for doing?
Mhm.
Uh, the accountability in my mind is the ownership of results. So do I own the bigger picture of this, that I'm accountable for it? And at the end of the day, the buck stops here. So
Mhm.
you and I both run small organizations, and there's nobody else above us.
Oh,
So we're accountable for the organization. Now, my
yeah.
colleagues might be responsible for doing certain things. I've got colleagues out there working today that are responsible for delivering what they should be delivering. But at the end of the day, the buck stops with me and my business partner, and there's nobody else. That's the accountability piece of it. And then the authority piece is we have a tool we call our authority matrix, and there's a podcast episode on that if you Google Humanergy Leadership Podcast and authority matrix. But it's about what level of power or decision-making power I have. And in our authority matrix, we ask some simple questions of a supervisor and their direct report.
Mhm.
And if you imagine, if I was talking to my direct report, I have got a column of things that I'm telling you, just do it. This is completely yours. Just do it. I don't. But then there's another column which is just do it, but tell me you've done it. And then we get
Yeah.
into a third column, which is a bit more discussion. So let's talk about it first. But you, as the direct report, still own the decision. So, and then the
Okay.
fourth column is let's talk about it and together we'll own the decision. And then there's a fifth column, which is let's talk about it and me as the boss, I still own the decision. And the idea is we have that conversation and we put the right things in the right columns. That provides clarity as to what authority I have. And that could
Mm.
be as simple as I want to spend some money on treating my staff. Okay, well, I'm going to say, you've got to, if you want to spend $100 on something, just do it. You see the budget, just do it.
Yeah.
If you want to spend more than that, then up to
Yeah.
$1,000, do it and let me know you've done it so I can make adjustments. If it's more than 1,000, we might need to talk about it. But I'm going to push you to make the decision because I want to push you to own your budget too.
Mhm.
And so that can help us understand that. And over time, all of those things may move. So as I get to work with you and understand your thinking and your the way you operate, then I may push that into, well, if it's going to be over $5,000, we should talk about it. But I've seen your judgment and I expect you to make these decisions. Just let me know you've made them so that I can adjust accordingly.
I love it. That also helps with like that delegation, especially when you're in a small team, small business owner, and you have to work on giving those things up. It's a matter of trust and building that over time. So it's a great way to kind of work your way through that.
Yeah, because
Um,
we encourage people, you push decision making down to where the information's at, as far down as you can. They should be making the decision, and that comes with that authority. So if I don't feel I have the authority, I can't make the decision.
yeah,
Whereas if it's clear I have the authority to make it, then I can more easily make the decision.
yeah, that makes good sense. And then you're empowering people on the bottom as well. There's a lot to that.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so also talking about teams, we were talking about offline a little bit beforehand, what industry consolidation looks like and how much that can change the dynamics of a team and what the changes look like when there's maybe a new company coming in after an acquisition that's merging with the original team, and this team has to learn how this team does things and all of that. So that's a huge topic that we could do 10 podcasts on by itself. But what are some of the key things that you coach companies through when it comes to trying to make two organizations into one in a way
Right.
that works?
Well, and this is a fascinating topic because a chunk of my work at the moment is with credit unions, and they are in the same kind of land
Mm-hmm.
at the moment. I've also done quite a bit of work in the nonprofit world, and you're seeing a lot of nonprofits do the same kind of thing. The United Way in our region just merged three different United Ways. into
Oh,
one for the
interesting.
whole of South Central Michigan.
Okay.
And I help facilitate the conversation to make that happen. And so the key in my mind is the understanding that what you're creating is a third culture. So you're
Mm,
bringing two cultures together and you're creating a third one. And it's now sometimes it's a matter of, hey, we're a giant organization, we're swallowing this teeny tiny organization, we're just going to mold them to our
hmm.
way of doing stuff. If you
Yep.
do that, though, you have to understand that those people are either going to jump in or be pushed out. It's going to repel or attract, depending on what that culture is. If you take the time to actually bring them along and have them be part of the development of this new culture, then you actually get their minds and their spirit in there as well. And so that idea of we're creating a third culture then drives you to say, well, what's the two cultures we're bringing?
Mm.
And with some of the merger work we do, we have a what we call a high performance organizational survey, which is a very simple culture survey that we do with organizations, so we can see where their strengths are and where their opportunities are, and then we can see whether those are going to be aligned or whether there's differences, and then we can also talk about, well, what do we want to see in this new culture as we move it forward, and that gives us the tools to then make sure we're doing what we need to be doing. All too often, the merger is decided on a spreadsheet,
Uh-huh.
and then it's expected to be implemented by people,
Yep.
and they're two very different approaches.
Yeah.
And so if you're not considering the people at the start of it, then you're going to struggle with that merger happening smoothly, and that's why you see so many mergers not get the benefit that you would hope that they would, because it looked good on paper, but the people didn't do the necessary work when it came to the people side of things.
So this is the first time I've actually talked to anybody who can help kind of in this middle role facilitate bringing two companies together. How can that help with having maybe somebody like Humanergy involved with like a merger of two companies or an acquisition and bringing teams together?
Well, and for starters, we don't bring. I'm not going to go out and find a client, somebody that you might want to
Oh,
merge with. That's
no,
down to the
but
industry.
yes.
But quite often, when that's happening, there's a need for the senior leaders to be able to participate in the conversation.
Mhm.
And so, what we offer is not only an independent facilitation that can just say, "Hey, what do you want? What are you trying to achieve here?" And let's go through our team understanding to get the culture that you want. But then we also plug in that survey so that we can see the data from different people and see what we need to pay attention to. And then usually it's a matter of coaching some of the key people. And so as you're going through that merger, are you thinking about the right things? Are you working with your team around it? Are you communicating proactively? Are you increasing the amount of communication so that people don't get nervous? Because these kinds of things always make people nervous for their jobs. And so what kind of information is being pushed out? So really it fits into those three. We can help facilitate some of those conversations. We can help coach leaders through doing it the right way, whether they feel like they're swallowing or being swallowed, depending on
Yeah.
the size of it. Or sometimes it's a peer to peer,
Yeah.
same size. And then the third one is that survey that we do, that helps just take a snapshot of the organization.
Okay, perfect. Okay, this is a little bit of a loaded question, but you were talking about surveys, so I figure I'll ask it. There's a lot of different surveys out there when it comes to hiring or determining like the personalities and stuff on your team. I was familiar with Culture Index, DISC, and some others prior to Michigan State. Now I've gone through the Leadership 360 that we just completed, and I met Sarah.
Yeah.
Um, so people could ask me about that later, ask about Sarah later. But talk about the value of doing surveys like that and why, because I know that Leadership 360 is obviously a tool that you prefer. What makes that different from a lot of the other options that are out there?
Well, I mean, anything that gives you good data is
Mm,
helpful. And so there's a lot of clients I
yeah.
work with who use a tool called Predictive Index just to have a look and
Mhm.
see whether somebody feels like somebody's going to be a fit into a position. There's DISC and Myers-Briggs, which look at
Yeah.
preferences and style, and sometimes they're really good to answer that question of who are we in the setup
Mhm.
box. and actually get to know the people in a different way and scratch at who they actually are.
Yep.
And on the executive MBA, we do a series of things to get you functioning with each other where you probably don't in the time realize how much of what I call a sniffing process is going on. That we're getting to know each other a little bit in that way, that and we accelerate it with some very structured focus. And then it's not unusual for people to say, wow, it feels like we've known each other for months, not just the 10 hours we've been together, because of that. And that's a good start for that. And then, of course, as you get into the program, you really get to know each other, which then is when the problems come up. With the what we call our effective leadership profile, the 360 that you've just
Yep.
experienced, that's a developmental tool for either high performers or senior leaders who are looking to get a snapshot again of how they're observed from a leadership perspective. And I call it developmental rather than evaluative, because the only people who get to see it are the person being evaluated or being assessed and the coach. It's not designed to be shared with a
Hmm.
supervisor or a board or anything like that. It's designed for the individual to get a real clear picture of how they're perceived so that they can adjust accordingly. And that adjustment might be change my thinking and behavior, or it might be just provide people with a different view of how I'm doing it. If
Hmm.
they're not seeing me do this, then how can I give them visibility to it? But that data we found is a really good starting point to a leadership coaching engagement. And it's something that, I've got clients that I've worked with for 20 years, and they've maybe done it 4 times in that 20 years because they want that different snapshot over time. And
Sure.
they'll come and say, I think it's about time I did a 360 again. It's like, okay, yep, well, we can get on that. And it's just to, again, see that how they're perceived right now. And then that data can help me as a coach guide them in what they can do differently to improve their little piece of the world.
Perfect. Yes, they're very insightful and more in depth than anything that I've done, because I've done other surveys even when I'm parts of teams, right, to figure out how you fit in. But this is completely different than anything I've done and very eye opening. So, okay, before we wrap it up, one more topic. I want to talk about conflict and resolving conflict within teams. This is a huge
No, you
topic,
don't.
obviously.
Sorry.
I know.
Yeah.
I might. I don't know. So what are some of this is again a huge topic that could be many, many episodes, but what are some of your top tips to help keep conflict at bay and then kind of work through conflict when it does come up?
But so in what great teams do great, one of the things we talk about in the way that teams should communicate and the difference between doing it the right way and doing it the wrong way are three simple things. And that's our communication should be caring, honest, and direct.
Yeah.
And if we get all three of those, then we're probably in good shape. What
Mhm.
tends to happen is we're all good at two of them. And if you've ever come across the idea of Midwest nice, where we are
Yeah.
here in Michigan, Midwest nice is when I'm caring and honest, but I'm not always direct. So it's like,
Mhm.
oh, I really like that Michelle. She told me so. I wasn't quite sure what she was telling me, but I really like her. And it's not that you're mean, because mean would be honest and direct, but not caring.
Yeah.
It's matching all three. And if I care enough, I'm going to be honest and direct.
Mhm.
But the three of them tie together. And if people are having conflict issues or problems with communication with folks on their team, one of those pieces is probably missing.
That makes good sense. I went through this a little bit early on in owning my company. I think the journalist and public relations person in me puts a nice PR spin on anything that I try
Yeah,
to convey to my team, which is then lacking the direct.
exactly. Yeah.
Didn't work
And
out well. It did not resonate well.
no, and they come away confused. And then that
Yeah.
confusion turns into they're not doing what you wanted them to do. So you don't know what to do next. And so you're nice to them again. And they still don't know. They think they're doing all right because you keep being nice to them.
And then you're frustrated and it snowballs and then becomes a conflict because I wasn't resolving the conflict right in the
Yeah.
first place. So
And I love the idea of clear is kind. So the
clear is
clearer I can
kind.
be, and clear is kind is about being caring, honest, and direct.
Yeah.
And it's that I'm caring enough to do this in a timely way, to do this in a way that is supportive of you, that feels that way. And I can let somebody go in a caring, honest, and direct way. And if I do it right, they'll come back to me later on and say thank you.
That's right. That's exactly right. Okay, David, anything else that you want to share? I appreciate you being here and the conversation. And yeah, anything else?
Well, thanks for having me on. And if people want to go to humanergy.com, they can
Yep.
see all the resources. And like everybody else in the world, I too have a podcast that has
Yes.
160 useful leadership tips and conversations that you can dig into. And if you don't know where to start at episode 150.
Why start there
Because it
to
tells
ask?
you, I got asked when I got over 100 episodes, I kept being asked, where do I start? And
Oh,
so I decided I got asked that enough that I actually made an episode about where to start and how to enter into it, because it used to be you'd start at episode one and work your way
yeah.
through. I deleted the first 7 episodes anyway because they were crap. So you
I
can
feel
start at
that.
about episode 8, and then but you'll get bored of my voice and my bad guitar playing by the time you get to episode 160. And so it's we're looking at ways of making it searchable, so you can have a look around. You'll usually find some tip or tool on there that's useful. If there's something you're struggling with, you can probably find an episode that helps address it. And then there's some really good conversations about different leadership issues like letting go and motivation and getting ready to hand over the whole organization to somebody else, which is something that might be interesting to some of your listeners.
I think it will. Well, David, thank you so much. And thank you for all of your wisdom and guidance. I look forward to some of our future calls that we have, and I will see you soon.
For more Restoration Today and the latest news, visit our website, cnrmagazine.com, and find the latest episodes of the Restoration Today podcast on your favorite podcasting platform.